Hi everybody. In this video, I want to take a look at setting up grass in Lumion. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can use grass and set it up in your scenes. And so what we want to do is take a look at the benefits and drawbacks of the different ways to do this. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, everybody, before we bounce over to Lumion, let's just take a quick look at the scene that we're going to work with. You can see we've got a pretty nice cabin model. This came in from the warehouse, and we've got a nice little green, what will be grass, ground plane. We've also got just some sort of hill, low-rise undulations within the landscape. Now, we take a look at this over in Lumion. You can see this is kind of what it looks like. Now, please note, I have dropped the resolution of my Lumion workspace just down a little bit, just so there's no real delay while we record. The first type of grass that we want to talk about is basically using just a grass texture map. And you'll see that by putting this green color here on in SketchUp, I can select this. Lumion will recognize it if you use the live sync, and you can see my live sync is active here. I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to go to materials, and I'm going to go to landscape. Now, you can see right here in the top left where it says grass, we've got a, kind of a pretty good bunch of different grass textures. The ones with the blue dot have been recently updated. They're part of the Lumion 2023. And you can also see we've got some older ones here of kind of varying quality. These look pretty good. There are a couple of issues that we want to be mindful of. The first is that they are by default just a 2K texture map, which is still passable. It's not quite as nice as having a high definition like a 4K texture map there, but the overall footprint for these is pretty light. And you can see that if we look at kind of our, up on the top right here, where we can see our frames per second, we're just bouncing around at about 33, 34, and that's while I'm recording at the same time. So there's really going to be a very light impact to performance. Now, the other cool thing about these is we can also double click, and if we want, we can load up our own texture map. So I'm going to click load map, and I'm going to load up this one that came from the Quixel Megascans library. There we go. And you can see they load up pretty fast. You can go, I believe, anywhere from up to 2, 4, and up to 8K. Just be mindful, an 8K texture is going to really kind of hammer your system a little bit. And Lumion is good once things have been loaded, but actually loading them up into your scene, I'd avoid that for now. All right, we've also got a couple of options here for map scale, the strength of the relief and the roughness and things like that. But overall, you can see it is exactly what it looks like. It is a flat texture map that has been applied to a ground plane. Now, one pretty cool thing about this is these are really good at being applied to curved surfaces as well. So it's not really difficulty to go over to where we've built our little undulations or rise in the land and paste these in. Effectively, you're just putting a texture map on, the raised ground. And yeah, it looks fine. Now, benefits to doing this is, of course, the performance impact. It's really light on your system, and it's not going to slow anything down. You can also use it to apply to a really large area for pretty much minimal impact. The flip, of course, is the lack of depth. Quite simply, if we zoom in here, and for example, if you had a nice camera shot set up right here, you'll kind of notice the issue. Even if you have one of these materials that, for example, let's pick this really bumpy looking one here, double click on that. It's just, yeah, it's flat. There's no other way to put it. There's a distinct lack of depth. And even though, yes, you can have a displacement map here, it's really not going to look great. So, what you kind of gain in speed and performance, you lose in the overall visuals and aesthetics. But all in all, good to know that you can do this. This is really the basic grass in Lumion. All right, everyone. Moving on to look at the second type of grass in Lumion. And for this, again, I am going to click on this ground plane, and I'm going to go materials, and again, we're under the landscape tab, and that's where you'll get all of these nice grasses and stone and gravel and things like that. Really good nature assets. And what we're going to look at is 3D grass. So I'm going to click on that. And you can see we've got some nice presets here with different patterns and designs, everything from checkerboard, we've got spirals, and we've got some pretty nice kind of circular grass. So this is effectively procedurally generated 3D grass. It's taking the surface and applying almost not quite like a hair simulation, but effectively just applying geometry that has a taper. Now, all in all, if we pull the camera back, yeah, it looks really cool. It looks like checkerboard grass. There are a couple of things we need to be mindful of with this, though. The first is the hit to the frames per second. If you start moving around in your scene and you have this applied to a large area, you're going to see some pretty substantial hits to your frames per second. Now, in a test that I was doing earlier today, it was effectively, for me, it was about a 50% reduction in literal frames as I was just navigating around the viewport. This is especially true if we go, for example, if I move myself out of the way, and I'm going to just click accept here, and we go to our actual settings, and we turn on the editor quality to high and the editor resolution. And if I back out here, you can see on the top right, I'm already getting a warning sign saying, hey, I've gone from about 35 to 37 down to about 19 frames per second. You know, chugging is the best way to put this. If we put these back, you do get to kind of keep the overall look, but it's definitely, the performance hit is substantial. Now, in seeing that, you might go, okay, I don't really care. I've got a really good GPU, or I'm on a workstation or something like that, and you can handle it. That's absolutely fine. The second thing you need to be mindful of is the settings for the grass. So I'm going to double click on this grass here, and you can see, again, we've got some settings. We can do things like adjust the actual size of the grass and adjust the grass length as well, so you could get a really nice wild grass effect. Also change the actual color. So for example, if you wanted something to look a little bit more fall or autumnal-like, or maybe just look like it's more dry, you could go in and do that right here. We also have options for things like the roughness and for the actual curliness. So whether you kind of want to make it look like there's a gravity effect going on, I mean also just the bending force here as well. So all in all, some pretty nice options. I'm going to just go back to just one of the defaults here. Let's take a look at this farm grass. Now, visually, does it look good? Yes and no. So with the camera back about here, you can kind of see it looks pretty nice. You know, you're seeing sort of the pattern in the grass, and you can kind of see that, you know, this does kind of, from the offset, look pretty nice. You know, if I was doing more commercial work with Lumion, particularly for homes or houses, things like that, this is probably the way that I would do grass in Lumion. Now, you want to be very mindful, like I said, you really only want to do this on a very, very small section, though. Quite simply, if you were showing off, for example, the front of your actual house like this, and you got a little area right in front where you know the camera is going to be, this is not a bad way to go about doing it, especially if you go in and tweak some of the settings. But as we mentioned, the price for this is effectively performance, and I really would not recommend anyone using this 3D grass for large areas. It's not what it was intended for, and really the everything from the rendering time to just the performance, it just isn't there. In addition, there's some other problems too. You know, it looks like exactly what it is. So for example, if we go to this kind of, let's take a look at our checkerboard grass too, you know, it looks like thin strips or planes that have got a green grass texture on. And there's a lot of things you could probably do, you know, using depth of field on the camera, or maybe just having it out of focus, or maybe adjusting the colors in Photoshop for a still image. But it still looks only okay-ish. All right, let's go ahead and move on. All right, everybody, moving on, let's talk about landscape grass. Now, if you're not familiar with how to do this, I'll run through it really quickly. First thing to note is you are able in Lumion to effectively sculpt and paint your 3D landscape. Now, In Lumion 2023, they've done a pretty good job of introducing some new landscape textures. And so let's click on one of these. Let me go to make sure I'm on the paint tab, and I'm going to just pick this grass 07. And you can see when we go to do that, we've got options for our brush size. I'm going to make mine a little smaller, and the brush speed. And I'm just going to left click here and start brushing. Now, let me show you. I'm going to put the snow grass on, might be a little clearer to see. There we go. Yeah, that looks quite nice. Now, these newer landscape textures, I'm not sure if they're just, newer because they're just new textures, or if they're higher resolution. You do have access to the legacy textures as well. I would be willing to bet that the new ones are a little bit higher resolution, but all in all, pretty handy that you can do this. And you can get some pretty nice results in Lumion if you're willing to kind of take some time to really kind of paint on the landscape. You can get a nice transition between different materials. Now, it's not quite material blending. If you're coming from like a 3D background, you're kind of like, oh, can I blend between actual multiple materials? Not quite, but, still, you can get a pretty nice result just by left-clicking and moving slowly. It's not perfect, but I think from distance, that would look pretty nice. Now, to turn on landscape grass, though, we have to flick over here to on the bottom left, hover where it says landscape grass. I'm going to turn that guy on, and I'm going to click on. Okay. Now, you'll notice it has applied this grass to the landscape here. So in order to better show this off, I'm going to go back to my paint tab. And you can see now these tabs on the bottom left have a little landscape grass assigned to this slot icon. So I'm going to put it on the actual, just go back to this green one here. I'm going to left click and apply it here. Okay. And in order to properly see this, let's paint out everything. So that'll give us a nice little area of just this cobble. And then again, click on the landscape texture. Okay, I'm going to drop the brush size and I'm going to increase the speed. And what you'll see here, as I left click, what I'm doing is both painting the texture map, but that also has the grass material assigned to it, the landscape grass. And so now I'm actually painting that on as well. Now you can turn the landscape grass on the default color or landscape texture, and it will apply everywhere. Don't really recommend that unless you want your computer to just go on fire. But approaching it from the point of view of, is a grass going to be close to the camera? And could I actually just paint in where I want it to be? I think that's a better way to approach this. And you can see as we left click here, I've got options for the brush size. Again, I can make it large, and I can also adjust the speed at which the grass is painted. I can also go ahead and adjust the tiling. Now, you're not going to see the tiling as much, but for example, if we go back and start painting with this little guy here, you can see as you adjust the tile size, it's basically going to repeat the texture as much as you want it to. But generally speaking, tiling repeating textures are not great. They don't look great, and they kind of ruin the illusion. Anyway, back to the landscape grass. Now, what's really, really cool about this is the landscape grass will take on the actual color of basically the texture that it's been assigned to. So you can see here, I'm hovering over, this is the landscape grass, and I'm going to select different ones of this. And you can see that it just updates almost immediately with really copying the texture map as a guide for how the grass should look. And this seems really like not a big deal, but it's really, really cool if you're working on different environments. So for example, my students just finished up working on a desert house design build, and it was really great to be able to paint in different really sand and, sort of desert environment textures, and then assign grass to a specific one and see that kind of sprout up. And it just looks a little bit more natural and more organic. The grass itself has got some pretty, sort of basic but useful options. We can adjust the actual grass size. It's a little hard for you guys to see that, so I'll zoom in. We can also adjust the grass height. So how, I can't think of a better way to put that, how high you want the grass to be. And we can also adjust the grass wildness, that is basically is how patchy do you want the grass to be, because really grass shouldn't form or grow in a completely uniform procedural manner. It should be a little bit more wild and patchy. other thing that's really cool about this is you can add scatter objects. So I'm going to add some here. You can see some of these are kind of really cool. Like the chamomile is really nice. I can throw in some of these. I can adjust the spread, and you can kind of see one little guy popping up right here. We can also adjust randomize size. So if you had multiples, you'd really see this. So let's paint some more grass really quickly. Okay, go back to our landscape grass, and I'm going to add some more scatter objects. I'm going to add some leaves, and I'm going to add some dandelions, which are growing quite wild in my own garden right now. Thanks. And I'm just going to add some clover here as well. And you can see we can go in and just add some of these scatter objects. It's such a small thing, but it's actually really, really useful because you don't realize just, you know, grass, just a green field doesn't look good. Having the option to put in weeds, having the option to put in little rocks, just very, very useful. Now, I wouldn't go crazy with these. I do think you could probably, you know, get to the point where you're adding so many that it looks unrealistic. But all in all, I think it's just a really great option. In terms of doing things sort of procedurally, this is not a bad way to do it. And you can see we can just keep adding more and more, and it will just populate the grass. And so again, if I go to paint, and we actually start painting in a much larger area, you can see that it is sprinkling in some of that vegetation and the rocks. Now, in terms of performance hits, again, you're generating, you know, basically strands or what are effectively kind of elongated polygon strips. At least I think that's what it's doing. And so you can see in terms of usage right now, just this alone, I'm using about 3 out of my 8 gigs on my stock 3070. So this is definitely going to come with another performance hit, although that's probably technically true of almost kind of anything in Lumion. This is still, though, I think absolutely one of the best ways to do grass. And, you know, if you're doing something where, for example, you're creating like barn dominiums or container style homes, I think this is the perfect way to generate landscape grass that looks really good for those more rural designs. All right, let's move on. All right, moving on. The next thing we want to talk about is outside of the actual texture maps. I'm going to move myself out of the way here. I'm just going to accept. And I want to talk about just using grass models and how you could actually use those in your scene. So in order to do that, we got to go to the content library. We got to go to place. And I'm going to go to nature. I'm going to make these thumbnails a little bit larger. I wish they were larger by default, but there's no option to change that. You just got to keep clicking large. And what we're going to do is ignore the fine detail stuff. There's just no way you could actually use those for what we need to do. But just going to look at actual grass. And if you don't spend a lot of time in the Lumion library, or you haven't been using it for you know, several years like I have at this point, you might not actually really think to go in here and just look for like basically grass models. You know, we spend a lot of time looking for trees and, you know, just things like that to, you know, to set the scene. But if we go into the grass, often kind of forgotten about is going to be these collections. So we actually have some pretty nice collections or clusters of grass that we can use. So they do tend to come in various different sizes. And you can see, thankfully, they have a scale measure, which I think is really clever. And you can do the individual sprigs. We've got options for wild ones. We've got options for thick ones. And I'm going to throw out a couple of different ones here just so we can see. And you can kind of see we can go, so let's start building up our scene here. And we also have, you know, kind of these rough ones as well. Now, if you use D5 render, it's very similar to the default grass mat is grass material, I think 1, 2, and 3 in D5. And so what it effectively is you know, very simple strip polygons with opacity maps on them and a little bit of bend. Now, to me, this is a totally valid way to build up grass. I wouldn't use them exclusively, and you can kind of see, you can probably go in here and add some more variations, almost like layering the grass up on top of each other will give you a kind of natural looking result. But unfortunately, it is kind of a wild one. It's not, I would love to just have a version of this which is almost like a clean cut, placeable grass. One potential way you could work around this maybe is to select these grasses. So I'm going to click on these ones right here, and you could drop them into the environment just a little bit. So let's grab this guy here. We'll zoom in and just take these down, and maybe just take some of these down. And you can kind of see by doing that, you get rid of this sort of, the height that they have, which is, kind of pronounced. Like a lot of the plants and objects in Lumion, they kind of float a little bit higher. You do kind of generally want to bring some of them down. Now that will help a little bit with getting the models to look a little bit better, but it's, it's not going to look perfect the way you're thinking of just normal commercial grass. And so, yeah, that looks, to me, looks fine. Now, in terms of performance impact, again, the more of these you add, really the more things are going to slow down. I would recommend putting it on its own layer. Just go up here, make a layer and rename it grass, and maybe do it that way. But, if you're going for a wilderness kind of vibe, this is a really great way to add in more random, less procedurally generated greenery. But going forward, I really would love to actually have really placeable grass that looks like normal lawn grass, that doesn't have the impact that the 3D grass did, which was really pronounced. Now, with that being said, there are a couple of other things that I'll go through here in a second. Those are basically the simplest ways to put grass in your scene in Lumion. If you liked the thumbnail for this video, I'm going to go through how to make that with you, and I'll just go through it really, really quickly, how to build up and layer your environment. If you've made it as well to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Really, really do appreciate both the people liking, the people who actually subscribe. Thank you so much. We're at over 2,000.